Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Face Your Ears podcast. My name's Rich Bozick, and I'm joined here with Justin Hoshella. How you doing, Justin?
Hello. I am doing well. How are you, Rich?
I'm doing well. Things are trucking along here at Bozick Voice Studio, doing a lot of teaching. Also, stepping into the studio with some clients, working on some of their projects, helping them lay down some vocals. As a matter of fact, we're involved in a project together.
That's right. Yeah, it's been great. So we're involved with a mutual client, and I'm currently working on a couple of songs with him right now, and it's been great. It's been a lot of fun. We're collaborating with a handful of different musicians that he's really close with, and so far, just where we are in the process, it's sounding incredible, and I'm really excited for the final product. So when we have more to share, we'll do that here.
That's awesome. How is everything going with your YouTube channel, by the way?
It is doing well. I've got a handful of videos up there now that just kind of showcase my style and approach. And I just wanted to spotlight a good friend of mine, Brian, who operates under the name Lux Lumen, who produced the animations that you'll see that play in those videos. So check them out.
Excellent. I did see some of that. It looks great.
Thank you.
So, what's going on? What are we talking about today?
So we are here today to talk about songwriting, getting started with songwriting specifically. That's why we titled this episode Seed to Song. So what we wanted to unearth in this episode is how you take the seed of an idea, get it, and you cultivate that into a song, right? So that seed, quote unquote, could be a melody, it could be a riff on a guitar, it could be a chord progression on a keyboard, something like that. That's great. That is the seed, if you will, of a song. And so what we want to talk about here is, how do you go from just a seed to a full-fledged song?
There are so many factors that come into play with regard to how people are creative. So people have different approaches, of course. So we're just going to toss around a few general ideas and give our own input.
And I think that's the best approach, is for every musician to have really their own personal point of view and everything. Because for me, fundamentally, music is so personal. And so I sort of recoil at the idea of like a one size fits all. And I hope that everyone can find their own unique signature or voice or sound or whatever that might be. And I think that can only be done if you have your own approach and process. I think there's technical tools that can help. However, I think in this episode, we're really focusing on like that personal journey.
So we're going to share our tactics, and maybe that will give you some ideas how to go about things for yourself. So, Justin, you just finished up with a long day of mixing and recording and working with clients, and you sit down at your rig and you want to think of some new material. How do you go about this?
For me, the core of my inspiration, my muse, if you will, is sound. For me, primarily one of the reasons why I'm so drawn towards electronic music is because it is so incredibly focused on sound. And the palette of sound is literally infinite. And so I love tapping into that. It sort of feels like tapping into the universe for me. And so I think when I'm in front of a synthesizer or a computer where those infinite possibilities exist, that's where I'm at. I'm on what I like to refer to as a sonic journey of sort of exploring the sounds built in or creating my own from scratch. However, if I'm sitting behind a piano, my mindset shifts a little bit, and now I start to think harmonically. So rather than focusing on timbre or sound, there's another, what did we say the rate of inflation was? 68 cents a word, 50 cents a word before, but now it's 68. So, the timbre or sound is less a concern because a piano is a piano. I mean, unless you're an avant-garde composer and you're shoving paper clips and rubber bands and stuff in there, that's a whole different topic. But But yeah, that when I'm in front of a piano, I'm exploring, for me personally, I gravitate towards harmony and chord progressions because I'm not a very skilled piano player. But then if I'm on a guitar where I have a little bit more skill, I'll focus on chord progressions and chords and harmonic structure and things like that. But on a guitar, I also have more of an ability to come up with melodic lines. And so sort of depends on my mood, I guess, of like where I kind of naturally gravitate towards in that moment. I try not to restrict myself too much personally and just allow myself to sort of gravitate towards those things in a natural sort of way. So that's how I can sort of sum it up. What about you? What are some of the similarities, or what are some of the differences in my experience and my outlook, for you?
Yeah, the process that you're talking about where you're starting from sound, that definitely happens with me sometimes, especially when you get a new instrument. Like when I picked up my new keyboard, all of those presets and patches that were on there, like, were totally helping me think of new ideas just by the nature of the sound itself.
Exactly.
In general, I kind of draw inspiration from everywhere, and I go beyond the boundaries, I guess, of just music.
A connoisseur of life is how I would describe you.
So I look at, like, visual art sometimes will inspire me. I'll see some visual art and that will, maybe I'll think of a melody or lyrics, or I'll hear a speech by someone, that is really good in their field and is giving a lot of good information, and that will somehow generate thoughts about certain topics. And then maybe I'll think of some lyrics, or maybe I'll pick up my guitar and I'll be inspired to strum some chords out, and that'll be the foundation of a song. So I could come at it from really any way. Sometimes I'll take maybe some poetry that I might have written, and at the time when I wrote it, I wouldn't think this could be a song, but later when I'm reading it, I might be like, this would go well with this riff that I thought of. Let me put these things together. So I kind of have a all is welcome approach with it. I'm sure, anyone would, if, the idea comes. But I don't have a set way of, like, sitting down and being like, if I do this, I'll generate ideas almost every time. It kind of depends on the day, how I'm feeling, what's going on, what I'm experiencing, what I'm going through. Sometimes I'll go see a show and it'll really inspire me to get creative when I see good performers doing good things.
I've definitely gotten that out of seeing certain bands live, that I just get really invigorated or inspired in some way that I wasn't before, or I heard or saw something that I just didn't think about before. And so I think that's an important thing to do too, is sort of fill that well and, seek out other art or other things to help you think and generate new ideas and perspectives.
I think something also that needs to be said is the classics are a classic for a reason. So people who are into newer music, I encourage you, step out of your bubble, go and listen to other music in your genre, or even other genres that was written before you, and it can inspire you. All the time I run into that with my students. They'll be maybe doing an R&B song and writing, an R&B style, and I'll be like, go and look at the R&B styles and singers go and look at the R&B singers of the past, and you'll discover something new.
I think that's what's so beautiful about marrying the past and the classics, if you will, with contemporary art and what's going on now, is that you will always generate something new. Invariably, it's impossible not to when you combine these things, because people are going to bring their own experience, their own influences, their own style, their own take to the classics, and something new will come out of that. That's just how art works, I think. Like, more broadly speaking, is that in theory, all art is rip off You know what I mean? Like people are inspired by other people and they're like, oh, I saw you do that, so I wanted to try this. And there's always connective tissue, but it's really neat.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic and an interesting one at that, because human beings are basically the only animals that do art.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this thing where it's personal, but it's also very interconnected with what you were saying, the experiential.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot that goes into it, and I think inspiration can be kind of messy. It's maybe a good way to describe it or think about it. And so I think that's one of the challenges we face is and you and I both share this, where we have different ways of coming up with ideas or approaching things, be it a guitar, be it, our computer, whatever. So how do you keep track of all this madness?
Great question. The biggest piece of advice that I would give to anyone is get good at labeling everything you do, whether it be you're writing it down on a piece of paper, try to give it some kind of title or put a date on it, or write a line up above it and circle it that says, kind of encapsulates, this is what this is about, this is where I want to go with it. Any thoughts, like peripheral thoughts that you might have about what you're doing, label everything. So like if you have stuff written in a notebook and you had some lyrics and you know that you want a certain kind of drum beat with it, don't just assume you're going to remember that. Write that down. It could be off to the side. Just take a few notes on what your thoughts were about that. So labeling, if you record voice memos, I think we've mentioned this in the past, like when you record voice memos and things like that, quick ideas, label all of that so that you could easily go back and make sense of the things that you've recorded. When you are recording in your DAW, make sure that you name the files in a way that you'll remember it. Even if you don't have a song title yet, you could think of something that will help you remember what you were doing, and then you can always rename it later. I also encourage you to try to compile everything in as close of a similar place as possible. Oftentimes I'll tell my students when they're getting their act up and running and they want to get out there as a performing musician, to get organized with a Google Drive where you could just put all of your lyrics and little song snippets and song recordings and photographs and everything all in one place, so that you could, the reason why you want it in like the cloud is if you are somewhere else and you have maybe a different device, but the login, you could still get to that material. There's ways to access it. Let's say you traveled somewhere to work on a songwriting session. You don't have to lug everything around with you. You could have it on the cloud, pull it up on your phone, be able to access right away.
And just another plug for Logic Pro. One of the features I also like is that Logic has a notes section. So if you are in Logic Pro and you look in the upper right corner, there's an icon that looks like a notepad, and it's a great tool for things like lyrics, like Rich was talking about, so they can live right inside the song. So that things like that seem trivial when you don't need them. But if you're like ready to go and record, you don't want to be in that moment feeling deflated looking for lyrics. Like, oh, where did I put that? It was a document and I saved it somewhere. Or was it on my phone? So it can just be really helpful in terms of workflow, kind of getting started quickly and getting into that song. And it can also be used for things like notes. So, that might be certain names of drum loops that you identify that you want to try out another time in your next session, things like that. So it's just a really handy thing to have live inside of your project with Logic. Yeah,
definitely. Another thing that I found helpful too is another way that I like to generate ideas is through improvisation. So I'll pick a song patch or a preset on the keyboard, and sometimes I won't even feel like setting up my rig. I'll just turn on the PA speakers in the room and I'll set my voice memos on my phone to record, and I'll start improvising and playing through song patches and through presets. One of the mistakes I made early on that I recall was I did this one night and I went through maybe like 10 different presets and jumped around to different parts of the memory bank in there. And I mean, there's like thousands of presets in this synthesizer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I realized was when I went back and I'm like, man, I really like this improv. I'm going to turn this into a song. I couldn't remember what patch it was. So I literally had to sit there and play through every patch and compare it to the recording until I found it. So then the way I resolved that for the next time I did it was, since I had the voice memos app running in the room at the same time, I would just, before I would start playing, I would just call out the name of the patch. And then I would play. And then when I felt like I was wrapping it up, and I would search around again, when I found something new that I felt like I was going to riff on again, I would call out the name of the patch again and just put it on the recording itself.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you really find the perfect sound, and really it's a pain when you got to dig through thousands of sounds to find it again.
Mm-hmm. Everything we're talking about is past you helping future you. So
yes, basically.
Be a good past you and set future you up for success. These small little things seem silly and trivial when you don't need them or they're not relevant, but we're just, highlighting things that we found to be really helpful for us in our sort of workflow. And Rich, that reminds me, one of the things because I had the same thing happen to me. I think one of the most tragic things is when I'm working on a project and maybe I update the software and then that breaks whatever sound I had in a synthesizer. And I'm like, well, got to start from scratch. I have no idea what that sound was, but I'll, engineer something new, I guess. And one of the things that I did to resolve that was in the project, whether it was Ableton Live or Logic Pro, is I would put it in the track name, patch number 53,
excellent,
whatever. That actually saved me, where I was like, oh no, I updated this synthesizer plugin and now the sound's gone, but I know I saved the preset number in the name. Another thing in terms of the electronic world is when you are creating your own sounds, it's a good idea to save that particular sound as a file, so that way you can reload that file if something catastrophic happens. And some update breaks it, or your hard drive catches on fire and everything's in the cloud. I don't know. But something crazy happens. So just good things to sort of keep in mind in terms of like staying organized and just being able to kind of follow through and complete things. Because I think this sort of goes into the next topic, which is obstacles. So what are the different obstacles that can keep you from writing music? And this is one of them, is when technical things happen and that bass line that was like the secret sauce and the super central part of your inspiration is gone. It can kind of take the steam out of a project and like it sort of dies on the vine. So many different obstacles, and we could probably have an episode just on that. But in the time that we have here today, we want to talk about some of the obstacles that exist to songwriting. So I think one of the most obvious culprits is time. Time and a busy schedule. And Rich, you're a busy guy. You have a full studio. You have a wonderful family. You're active in the community. How do you find time to sit down to be creative or focus on songwriting?
Yeah. The number one thing that keeps me writing is I set a day of the week that's my writing day. So usually every Monday night is my writing night. So I'll work, and then after work I'll hang out with the family a little bit, say goodnight, and then I come down, I put the phone in airplane mode and fire up the rig, and I start to generate ideas through improvisation, or there might have been something that throughout the week I thought of earlier in the week that I want to flesh out. And then if on a Monday I don't feel those creative juices flowing, what I might do is then work on an older project. Regardless, every Monday I sit down in front of the rig or stand in front of the rig and work on something. Like it's my set time.
Yeah.
And actually I got that idea from there was a professor back in college who was a composer, and I think it was a Wednesday or something. He didn't teach on Wednesday at the college, and he would block out literally the whole day. He wouldn't answer phone calls. Sometimes he wouldn't even answer the door. I think one of my friends was brave enough to go to his place because he was like one of his private students, and he knocked on the door and he got like grilled, like insane grilling, because he like was disrupting, the composition process. But anyways,
Jeez.
That inspired me, like, set aside time, like put it in your calendar, cut out a night of Netflix and get into your studio at home and make time for it. My big thing is don't wait for the stars to align and for the muse to come down at night and inspire you to create something. I mean, that's always nice when it happens. I love that. Everyone loves that. But I find if you are diligent about it and you book time in your schedule for yourself to write, you're more likely to be consistently writing and also finishing old projects.
I think that's a key word, is consistency. Creating habits. I'm a big fan of James Clear. He's the author of Atomic Habits, which is a really fantastic book about how small incremental changes are essentially compound in their impact. So over time, if you are getting into really good behaviors and rhythms of things, really, really great things can come out of that. And so that's kind of the mindset I have, is just making it a regular habit and just doing it all the time. And I also take inspiration from Stephen King, who is, as many of you know, another author. I think fairly well known. But no, he actually, one of his non sort of horror thriller books is called On Writing, where he talks about writing and being an author. And one of the things
I've heard of this book.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a great book. And one of the central ideas that he talks about in being a writer, which is a creative pursuit, is just doing the work. Like, you just have to sit down and do the work every single day. Whether you're inspired or not is irrelevant. Basically, that's what I took, is that's not really in the equation. You just sit down and do the work. And some days are good, some days are bad. That's any job.
Yeah.
There's always going to be obstacles and challenges. And it's also it's part of Stoic philosophy, is that the obstacle is the way. And I think that is very true in creative pursuits, is that writer's block, or this melody, or this color combination, palette, whatever it is, there's always going to be an obstacle in the creative pursuits that we have. And I think that's sort of the point, is that's how art is created. I am pretty confident that no piece of art was created without some sort of obstacle. I don't think that exists. I think that's part of the joy of creating art, is that you do overcome obstacles, and it's so exhilarating and thrilling when you do.
Excellent. So another obstacle that I thought of could be making sure that you have proper backups for what you're doing. So if you're working with a DAW and you have a lot of material saved up on your hard drive, make sure that you have a backup, whether it be cloud storage or another drive or something.
The project file no longer existing is definitely an obstacle that we would rather you avoid than experience.
I have a buddy who's a visual artist who had about a year's worth of content saved to hard drives because of the nature of the way he created the art. And his main drive died and his backups died. So from that, after going through that, and that was devastating because that's a lot of material, he then opted he needed to go cloud storage with all of it.
Yeah. A friendly reminder to all of you listening that hard drive failure is not a question of if, it is a question of when. So hard drives are just mechanical pieces of metal and plastic, and all of them will fail at some point. Maybe some will last up until the point where the sun explodes. I don't know, but some of them don't last until the next sunrise. So, always back up. And I think nowadays we just have that added luxury of cloud backups, where it's like when a freak thing like that happens, or redundant backups are, eaten up by the data gods, or demons, you got somewhere to go.
Do you have one more obstacle?
Yeah, I did want to mention, I wanted to plug a resource actually that I think is really cool. And then this is posted on our website right now. So if, we'll put a link to our resources page, but this is a book called Making Music, 74 Creative Strategies for Electronic Music Producers. And one of the things I mentioned on our website is that don't be fooled or scared by the words electronic music producers, because I think there's some really great ideas in this book that are worth mentioning. So what I like about this book is that it isn't really, it's more of a reference. It isn't like a novel that you're going to read cover to cover. So each sort of chunk or chapter of the book focuses on different topics. So this is funny. I opened the book to the table of contents here. The very first thing is 3 ways to start. There you go. So, they give you 3 ways to start, or they have a section on collaboration. They have a section on personal workflow. They have a section on goalless exploration, which I think I can be guilty of sometimes. I'm just sort of lost in the ether. So anyway, this is a really cool resource and a great book, and I tap into this from time to time. If I'm facing a certain issue or struggle, I'll take a look at this book to see if they have any ideas or suggestions that can kind of help me out of that rut. So I think seeking out really good resources like that is important, and it's good to have some of those at your fingertips.
Excellent. So basically, to boil down today's episode, we got into the basics of tactics for idea generation in the first part here. In the second part, we talked about staying organized and how that could be helpful as a creative person. And then we just ended it with a few obstacles that you could run into. Obviously, all of these things could be expanded upon endlessly, but we just wanted to start to tap into this idea of songwriting. I definitely want to explore more of this in the future and get more specific. Like, I would love to talk to you about how do you take that patch and how does that patch then become a melody or a chord progression, and get into that.
We can definitely unpack that in a future episode. And I think to give a concrete example, something that haunts me, and I'm sure a lot of musicians, is getting out of the loop. It's so easy to open up a DAW, your music creation app, and just set up a 4 or 8 bar loop, create a few different ideas, maybe a drum loop, maybe a melody, maybe a bass line, maybe a cool sound effect, whatever. And so you just spend your time within this 4 or 8 bar loop, soloing and muting and tweaking, and all of a sudden you're just stuck in that 4 to 8 bar loop. I know I'm guilty of giving up a lot of times, where I just run out of inspiration and I'm just like, well, I don't know what else to do, so I'm just going to move on to the next thing, and the cycle repeats. That's something I definitely face from time to time. And again, I think this book that I mentioned, Making Music, has some really great strategies to sort of get out of that loop.
All right. I think that about wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Justin, for the conversation.
Thank you, Rich. This was great. I had a lot of fun.
All right. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Face Your Ears podcast. If you found this episode entertaining and informative, be sure to share and leave a review. Also, check us out on social media and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. For more information related to our podcast, head on over to www.faceyourears.com. Links can be found in the show description. And remember, whether you're a musician just starting out or a seasoned professional looking to talk shop, it's time to face your ears.